What are you doing here, Damiano? Answer me.
Since its debut, the Mafia series has steadily marched forward through the decades. The original is set in the 1930s, its sequel spans the 40s and 50s, and Mafia 3 unfolds during the late 60s. If the next step was gonna be the 70s, or the 80s, or both, I was certainly ready. Casino intrigue, shine boxes, borrowing huge kitchen knives from Martin Scorsese's mum in the middle of the night.
I need this knife. I'm gonna take this, it's okay?
Okay, yeah,
I just need it for a
bring
little
it
while.
back, though, you know.
Whatever it was, I was up for it. However, instead of moving closer to the end of the 20th century, Mafia The Old Country takes us back to the beginning. And not just to the beginning of the century, but to the formative era of the Mafia itself. Part mob drama and part western, The Old Country may be a safe and conventional third-person action adventure on the surface, but it's a moody and engaging one that makes great use of its uncommon setting and is brimming with old-school atmosphere so heady you can practically smell the sun-dried tomatoes.
Loyalty. Honor. Obedience. They set the man apart from the rest.
After experimenting with a more free-form open-world structure in the divisive Mafia 3, Mafia The Old Country returns to the format of the original Mafia and Mafia 2. That is, it's linear and tightly story-driven, and the open world is largely just a vivid backdrop to move through between objectives and during some missions.
Take it right here. I want to show you something.
This has always worked well for the Mafia series, and The Old Country is no exception. This approach gives The Old Country an effective sense of place and scale, immersing you in a rich and evocative Sicilian countryside, but without bloat.
Life is tough out here, Vince.
It's a very detailed, varied and convincing map, but there are no towers to scale or arbitrary icons to visit and clear. Your attention is simply required on the story and the story alone. As a single-player sucker who inhales this kind of thing for its story, setting and style, I was quickly hooked.
Grazie.
If you're the kind of person who might be tempted to use the Sicilian language option alongside subtitles in the language of your choice, you're in the right place. If you're the kind of person who pounds through cutscenes craving their next chance to slap the citizens of Steelport with a giant purple dildo, it's possible the Mafia series may not be your speed.
This is good. Good might be a stretch, but it's yours for now.
Beginning in 1904, The Old Country charts a chronicle in the life of young Sicilian Enzo Favara, who escapes a life of slavery in the region's dangerous sulfur mines run by the ruthless Spadaro crime family, to find himself working for their local adversaries, the Teresi family. The story hits a lot of standard beats, and all the usual suspects are here. The fair and kindly mentor, and the loyal best friend with a habit of testing the patience of others around him.
We're here!
The stern and powerful Don, and his cynical consigliere.
What's this farman did?
The slimy and treacherous rival boss, and the forbidden love.
See you around, Enzo.
There are some neat connections to the existing games in the series too, for fans who pay close attention.
I don't know how you did it.
So yes, it's a fairly familiar and predictable 13-hour saga for anyone with a basic level of gangster movie literacy, but the writing is strong and the voice performances are stronger.
We let him act tough in front of the boy.
And then we remind him of his obligations.
The highlight is arguably Don Teresi himself, whose English voice actor Johnny Santiago injects with a quiet, husky intensity that is as credibly intimidating as a man in his position would need to be.
I ask you a question.
He stalks the screen as the kind of guy that men who kill for a living would actually take orders from.
His family loyalty is everything.
Familiar too is the third-person action, as The Old Country plays like any typical cover shooter from the last decade or so. This was the case in 2020's Mafia Definitive Edition, and it's the same again here, albeit with a Wild West flavour thanks to the era-specific arsenal, like revolvers, repeaters and various shotguns, and the fact that shootouts sometimes occur on horseback, and or against fellas who look like they've just stumbled home off the set of a Sergio Leone picture after a full day of making Clint Eastwood look cool. Even without engaging much with its rosary bead system of minor combat buffs, which I did regularly forget about, it's not a massive challenge with the default soft-locking aiming controls. However, I don't play these sorts of games to be relentlessly punished. Some enemies will hunker down behind large objects and walls, and others will stoically stride towards you to be blown out of their boots. The AI isn't always sharp, and it's definitely a little janky to find yourself completely flanked but still have the time to stand up and clumsily blast a bloke who had you dead to rights at point blank range, but the shootouts are nonetheless serviceable. The Old Country's stealth doesn't rewrite the rulebook either, but it does strengthen the action overall. Stealth is sometimes required by the design of the missions at hand, but on other occasions it's available as an option. There are a number of encounters throughout, with environments that have been laid out for us to be able to sneak around and pick off all the enemies one by one, but also seamlessly pivot to hosting an out-and-out gunfight should you flub it and be spotted. You can toss coins and bottles for distraction, but unfortunately only some bottles, that is, the ones arbitrarily marked. It's always a bit of an immersion breaker when levels are decorated with inconsistent props. I'd vastly prefer to just be able to pick up any bottle. Failing that, just delete the bottles we can't pick up during missions. Crucially, you can pick up and move bodies, and there are boxes to stash them in. The stealth is pretty standard, but with distractions and body hiding, it does feel like a proper stealth system, and not just a tacked on afterthought. Enzo can temporarily highlight nearby enemies in the environment, which is essentially a superpower that's hand-waved away as his impeccable instincts. It probably could have been more logically introduced during the Underground intro as some kind of innate ability he honed after spending the bulk of his childhood in a dark sulfur mine, but no matter. At any rate, once you have a feel for where your enemies are and which way they're headed, all that's left is to sneak around, grab them, and either button bash to strangle them or tap your knife attack to speed up the process. That said, I actually rarely used the latter. Not because I was feeling merciful, but because stabbing your victims costs you a block of durability off your knife, which needs to be sharpened with a whetstone if and when it runs out of stabs. It's not a game breaker, but I'm not really into the idea of not being able to stab a bloke simply because the knife is immediately no longer pointy enough to do so after slaying a few of his mates. And whetstones were a consumable I didn't always have. I mainly just strangled my enemies to avoid this issue, but it feels like a slightly unnecessary system, particularly when durability concerns disappear during the Old Country's new one-on-one knife fights. These knife fights are essentially boss encounters presented as a one-on-one showdown with another man. They occur outside regular third-person action gameplay, and you're locked into these battles until there's a result, or your opponent is scripted to scarper. The attacks, parries, and dodges in knife fights are bespoke to this mode alone. They're flashy and bloody, but a lot of the time I did just feel I was simply dodging and slashing my way to a cutscene, where a further complication or a switch in momentum will occur. Sometimes you'll trigger an animation that makes you a passenger for a while, then Enzo's health bar recharges while your enemy's does not. I'm not sure what the thought was there. The knife fights look cool and they're not like anything in the series to date, but they do feel a little low stakes at times. As a linear adventure, The Old Country admittedly doesn't share the same scope of Rockstar's genre-defining westerns, but it's certainly adjacent to them in tone and atmosphere. There's a certain undeniable swagger that comes with riding into town on horseback and on the wrong side of the law, and The Old Country captures this with similar effectiveness to the Red Dead series.
Here we are.
The early 1900s setting doesn't just shine a spotlight on the early days of the Sicilian Mafia, it's also a window back to the Edwardian era of automobiles, when cars began competing with horses as the primary method of transportation. Developer Hangar 13 has done an exceptional job in this department, especially with the sound. These 120-year-old cars have primitive engines, whining chain drives, and open cabins with no sound deadening. And The Old Country has captured their raw and lumpy burbles immaculately. It definitely can't be understated how much richness this adds to driving around the map. It's not just engine sounds either. When a gramophone is brought on a drunken car trip, be sure to listen as it misbehaves when you bounce around off-road. There's a lot of consideration here, and I respect that. Yes, there's a race mission, but it's not been shoehorned in here to taunt those who are still haunted by the infamously tricky racing event in the original Mafia. Sicily was the home of the Targa Florio, established in 1906 and one of the oldest motor racing events in the world, so it makes perfect sense in this context. The Old Country's riff on this race is sadly all too brief. It's over in less than 7 minutes, but it is one of the most memorable and thrilling missions. It certainly made me wish Enzo could have cut ties with the Cosa Nostra and raced around Europe full time. I don't know what's more dangerous, betraying your oath to the family, or trying to tame an aircraft engine that's had 4 tyres and a steering wheel strapped to it. On the topic of engines, however, it should be noted that the Old Country shifts the Mafia series off its previous proprietary one and onto Unreal Engine 5. From my perspective, the impact isn't a dramatically profound one. 2020's Mafia Definitive Edition remains a handsome looking game, and so is the Old Country. What I can say is that I haven't experienced any of the minor bugs that occurred during my first playthrough of Mafia Definitive Edition, and that I haven't had to manually restart checkpoints to overcome unexpected jankiness, or fallen through the map. At least on PC, as we weren't provided access to the console versions ahead of launch, so we'll have to wait and see how those run. But outside of the occasional frame rate flutter and some light pop-in, my time with the Old Country has been quite robust, although perhaps not quite as robust as the incredible array of food and produce on display throughout.
The kitchen's this way.
Games rarely make me this hungry. A game may have never made me this hungry. I'm craving cannolis and cake. I'm wading through arancini ball recipes. I'm considering a vegetable garden to grow tomato varieties I can't find. I've officially turned into my dad, and the Old Country is the game that did it.
We do not always get to choose what we do.
Suppose not. We can choose who we are.
Mafia The Old Country is an effective return to the linear and tightly story-driven format of the original Mafia and Mafia 2. It doesn't reinvent stealth, and there's nothing especially remarkable about its typical third-person cover shooting. But with great writing, excellent vocal performances,
Bravery is not common in this world, and so...
and a wonderful eye and ear for detail, The Old Country is a potent and immersive time machine to a rarely explored era. This may be the Sicilian cuisine talking, as I've never played anything with quite as much Italian fruit and food on show, but I think the Mafia games might have established themselves as the arancini balls of the business. That is, crusty on the outside, but on the inside, they're dense, tasty, and a little cheesy. And if you keep bringing them out, I'm going to keep going back to the buffet until the kitchen runs dry.
Then, one more.
Executive Reviews Editor Tom Marks here with Luke Riley, our reviewer for Mafia The Old Country. Luke, I'm sure you've seen around, he does a ton of reviews. He reviewed Mafia Definitive Edition in the same sort of space, Mind's Eye, although less glowing about that one, obviously, recently. And on the other side of the law, The Precinct. And then also, you probably know Luke if you are a racing game fan. Luke, I think basically any game with 4 wheels in it, you are the reviewer of, and people know you well for that. But this game does have a little bit of that, but let's talk about the series in general first, your tastes within it. What's your favorite game in the Mafia series? What do you like about the series? You know, that sort of stuff.
Well, I think my favorite Mafia remains the original. And I was so excited that they remade it. The Definitive Edition was it ticked a lot of my boxes. It updated it dramatically, obviously, because the original is over 20 years old. But it's certainly my favorite story, and probably my favorite era of kind of American gangster crime, that kind of pre-World War II space, although Mafia 2 was fabulous as well.
So it sounds like the setting, theme, story, vibe is kind of more important to you maybe than the gameplay side of it, or are they equal? Like, how do you fall in that, I guess?
That's a good question. The setting's very important, particularly with the Mafia games, because the gameplay... Alright, let's take Definitive Edition. Take Mafia 1 Definitive Edition, for instance. Put against any other typical third-person shooter or sort of action driving game. It was very conventional. It's kind of a conventional cover shooter. It was all fine. And that sounds like a pejorative, like I'm dismissing it. But like, fine is great.
Yeah, a game does not have to be revolutionary to be fun.
Yeah, and that's the case for this one here. It's the case for The Old Country. The Old Country doesn't, as I mentioned in the review, it doesn't reinvent really anything. It certainly doesn't reinvent third-person cover shooting. It doesn't reinvent action driving. It doesn't reinvent stealth, certainly, even though it is, there's a lot of nice functionality within that makes it a nice, solid stealth system that is usable. Like I said, hiding bodies, distractions, all that stuff is without that now. After so many years of really solid stealth experiences, that kind of just makes it really a tack on. That you're just like, you know what? It's just going to be quicker if I just blast everybody in this level and move on. But with those little extra flourishes, it makes it a viable option, particularly if you're going to replay it. If you want to replay it and be like, you know what? I don't think I had it. Maybe I played this a little impatiently. Or maybe I persisted when I could have restarted and seen if I could have gotten further with pure stealth.
But it's the theme that it sounds like it's the theme that elevates that, right? It's sort of whatever the story is, whatever's going on beyond it is what's bringing that totally serviceable gameplay kind of up a notch in your mind.
Yes, that's really important for me, and I love period games. So I love Red Dead. I love LA Noire. I love games because I love games that act as time machines because they're such a fascinating way of experiencing a completely extinct time period in a non-passive way. You know what I mean? Like, I love watching old movies. I have like such dad taste in movies. I love old war movies. I love old gangster movies. And I love absorbing them and, looking and watching the old, the old cities, the old cars, everything, the old costumes, listening to the old music. But games, you can live in those spaces. You know what I mean? That's the beauty of those sorts of things. It's certainly the beauty of Red Dead and LA Noire and the Mafia games. You basically kind of you're visiting a place as well as experiencing a cool story. You're not just watching along, you're playing.
Sure.
So yeah.
So speaking of that world, you mentioned this in the review that Mafia 3 was much more of an open world, almost, leaning into the GTA inspirations a little bit more in that vibe, and that was kind of divisive. So this one goes back to the linear sort of structure. Where do you fall in that debate? Did you like the open world of Mafia 3? Would you have preferred Old Country to explore it a little more, try to refine it, improve it? Or are you glad that they just sort of went back to what worked originally with the series?
I think it's the latter. I think there's more nuance to their answer, but I think it's the latter. I am glad that that's what they've done because I think it plays to their strengths. And if this makes Hangar 13 nimble enough to continue these sorts of games, to bring Mafia to different time periods, and it's successful and it's what people want, then that suits me. That suits me down to the ground. So I remember bouncing off Mafia 3, not because I wasn't enjoying it, just because I guess it was a little different to what I expected. I guess the busy work, if you call it that, wasn't what I kind of wanted from a Mafia game, even though like I said, the setting was fabulous. The city was really cool. The performances were great. The performances and the stories in Mafia games are always exceptional. And Mafia 3 was no exception there. But I did bounce off it. But I went back to it ultimately, and I did finish it. But it's not my preference. It's not my preference for a Mafia game.
Sure, fair enough. So the final thing I want to ask you is kind of as a touchstone for the Mafia series. Mafia 3 was 2016, the definitive edition was 2020, I think.
2020, yeah.
So this series has not been dormant, but it hasn't been super active in recent years or anything. So for people who maybe aren't as familiar with Mafia, especially those earlier games, what are some games that you kind of look to of like, oh, if you like this game, X series or whatever, you should check out Mafia The Old Country. You might be interested in this as well.
But if you're completely unfamiliar with Mafia, I think that even if you don't gravitate towards this kind of open world action driving style game like GTA or anything like that, let's say Mafia has like things in common with Uncharted on account of its high presentation values and its like commitment to a really cinematic experience and a good story with really well blocked cutscenes and great performances and but it also has things in common with something like Red Dead Redemption, particularly Red Dead Redemption in this instance because of that time period. I think it's easy to kind of maybe forget that Mafia The Old Country finds itself set of not the same universes by any stretch, but it finds itself set between Red Dead Redemption 2 and the original Red Dead Redemption in terms of its time period. 1899 I think for Red Dead Redemption 2, and then a little bit later on for the original. Yeah, I think if you like those, certainly if you like those sorts of settings, if you like LA Noire, again, which is kind of in that wheelhouse, that has that layer of investigation and that cop angle, but in terms of a curated experience which uses that open world as a really vivid backdrop to transport you back in time and give all that action a space to live in, but it's not the focus of what you're doing, and it's not this kind of a place that's full of, as I said in the review, towers to scale and icons to go to and do little mini missions at. It's not full of all that busy work.
Well, thank you very much, Luke, for chatting with us a little bit more about your taste in Mafia, the genre in general, the review, all that jazz. If you want to check out Luke's last review, very different kind of game, but Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3+4, like we said earlier, 4 wheels, therefore Luke reviews it.
That's it.
And if you want a different kind of linear first-person, story-ish driven, action-adventure-ish game, Tristan reviewed RoboCop Rogue City Unfinished Business. Again, very different.
That is a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. It is a mouthful, and there's just not a ton of these sort of single-player, story-driven action games coming out right now.
That's why you gotta embrace them when you can, Tom.
Exactly. And for everything else gaming, stick right here on IGN.